Welcome to episode 44 of the Yoga Meets Movement Science podcast. On this episode, we are going to be diving deep into the yoga teacher's scope of practice. So, scope of practice can be defined as the limit of your knowledge, skills, and experience, and it's made up of the activities that you carry out within your professional role. So, we're going to be talking about what yoga teachers are qualified to teach. And when we sometimes see yoga teachers stepping outside of that expertise. Generally speaking, we think of yoga teachers teaching a combination of yoga specific practices like asana, pranayama, meditation, and maybe also yoga philosophy as well. But we also sometimes see yoga teachers taking on other roles like addressing their students' pain and injuries, consulting with students about psychological issues like anxiety, stress, and depression, correcting students' posture, offering nutritional advice, and just general advice about students' health. So, we're going to talk about whether some or all or none of these practices fall into a yoga teacher's scope of practice. And what's important to point out before we dive into this is that this is different from medical fields that are more tightly regulated because yoga is not regulated. There's no licensure involved. There's no governing authority that sets out this official legal scope of practice for the yoga teacher. Some might point to Yoga Alliance, but that is just a registry. It's not a government appointed regulatory body. So the discussion that we're going to have today is really just our opinions. And of course, as we always do, we're going to do our best to come at this from an evidence-based lens. But ultimately, a yoga teacher's scope of practice is subject to one's interpretation. You can decide for yourself what you think. One other thing to point out is that some yoga teachers may also have licensure as a healthcare practitioner, and that licensure would allow them to have a different scope of practice than a yoga teacher who's not a healthcare practitioner. So the conversation for today is really going to be focused on people who are just yoga teachers. To have this conversation with us today, we have invited on a very special guest. And that guest is named Catherine Wilkinson. She is the founder of Wellness Connection Yoga School in Cape Town, South Africa, where they run 200-hour and 500-hour yoga teacher trainings. And we really admire Catherine because she is the epitome of an evidence-based practitioner, in our opinion. We've been big fans of her work and her teachings for a long time. She has also been practicing yoga for a long time. She's been practicing for 25 years. She's been teaching for 15 years. And we just knew that she would be the perfect person to have this conversation with because she trains so many yoga teachers and she sees their questions and their confusions around this issue. So, Catherine, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm honored.
Catherine, we're so happy to have you here. I feel like we've been connected with you and friends with you like through the online world for years now. And like Travis said, we've both been such admirers of your work and the yoga teacher trainings that you run and just how much you really strive to be as evidence-based or as science-based as possible in what you offer and what you teach. So it's just really amazing to get to sit down with you and like have a conversation, quote in person, even though we're remote. It's just really special. So we're so happy to have you here. And we're definitely going to dive into this scope of practice, this big meaty topic that Travis just introduced. But before we kind of get there, we thought it might be nice just to ask you a bit about kind of your own yoga history and background. And as someone who Travis mentioned has been in the yoga community for quite some time now, I'm sure you just also have some interesting observations on, maybe the way that you had seen the way things used to be and maybe things, how they've evolved and just how the yoga world may seem a little different today from when you first began. So we were wondering if you could just maybe let us know, like, what first got you into yoga when you first started, and maybe a little bit about kind of like your earlier yoga experience.
Okay, that's I really bore all my 200-hour and 500-hour students with this story. So if you're listening, I
What?
apologize to the story. So I started yoga a long time ago. It might even be over 25 years now. And I started yoga when there was no yoga really, as I think the majority of people know of yoga today. There was no yoga in gyms. There was no yoga in studios.
Mm.
There was no internet. Can you imagine? Okay, there was.
No.
I don't want to. Maybe I'm exaggerating, but I'm not sure if they were DVDs. I think it might have been VHS. I'm really, really talking a long time ago. So the whole world was completely different yoga-wise. It was traditional yoga, and I'm talking. I lived in London most of my life. It was traditional, what I would term as traditional yoga, Shivananda yoga. There was an odd Iyengar studio around. And I don't even think in London at that stage there was Ashtanga at all. So
Wow.
it was a completely and utterly different world to how amazing it is now with just so many different fields of yoga and yoga online and all that we know.
I could see that. And back then it was just people were going to like these very few yoga studios, not even taking yoga in gyms,
Mm.
maybe the odd like VHS videotape that someone might like buy at the store and then practice at home.
Exactly. I had a book by David Swenson. That's when I started
Oh,
getting
yes.
into Ashtanga yoga. It was a book, and I show it to us. It's a book with him in a Speedo on on the front cover in Warrior 2. I swear, it's a real proper Ashtanga.
Catherine?
Jenni, I think you did Ashtanga as well. I mean, that's
Yes.
luckily in the book, he's got slightly longer cycling shorts on. But on the front cover, he's really got what we call in England and South Africa a speedo, really short, swimming speedo. And so that's
Yes.
how I learned to do sun salutations. Jumping was from the book where he broke it down. So yes, I think, long
Catherine.
story short, it was a really long time ago.
That's so funny. I don't know if but several years ago, like in my earlier yoga history, I owned a yoga store in Santa Barbara and it was called
Yeah.
Drishti, the Gaze. And we had a huge book selection. So I was really familiar with like all the core yoga books and we totally sold I remember we reordered that book so many times. We had a lot of people. It's like at least our version, it was spiral bound and he was fully in the Speedo. Yes. I know that
Brilliant.
book really
I
well.
need to see this book.
Brilliant.
Travis,
I'll
we're gonna have
send
to
you
get a copy. Yeah, that's really funny. Wow, well, that's so cool to hear about what things were like and how you experienced yoga back then. So it sounds like you developed a regular practice, like through those means, through the David Swenson book and maybe the Shivananda Studios, Iyengar, just
Mm,
kind of putting things together. At some point, you decided to open your own yoga school. And
that's
how did
right.
that happen?
I got really lucky. Well, I lived in London most of my life, and then I moved to Cape Town because it's the most beautiful city in the world. And I
Yay.
started teaching, but years after I trained as a teacher. And I started teaching ad
Mhm.
hoc here and there. And I got quite a nice following. I wasn't at all evidence-based then, not at all.
Yeah.
I
None of us were.
I didn't
Yeah.
know what it meant, I don't think then. I did
Right.
in health sciences way, but not in a yoga way. And a couple of
Mhm.
my students begged me, Mandy Hewlett begged me, she runs a big studio now, to do a teacher training. And I said, no way, no, it's too much work. And they begged and begged and begged. And then I thought, why not? I didn't have
Mhm.
very good teacher trainings. And I thought maybe I can do it better. And that's really how I started. I had a studio before with some classes, but then that's how I started doing yoga teach trainings, which was only a couple of years after having a studio. And that's where all the evidence-based yoga things started to
Ooh,
show themselves to me.
That makes a lot of sense. I wonder if it has anything to do with that process of sometimes when we set out to teach something. I just know this has been my personal experience. When you set out to teach something, then you start to realize where your knowledge gaps are and what you don't actually know, and maybe that sparks further research. And then I don't know. I wonder if that was part of it for you. That once you started to teach, maybe that's what tapped you into a more like how you maybe hadn't been as evidence-based as you are now. Like maybe that was part of your shift, was starting to teach other teachers.
Completely. And I have a health sciences background, and
That's right.
specifically in nutrition. And so I used to live in the British Library, which is, has all the medical journals, and I was able to do research on that basis. But I don't think it ever occurred to me that yoga would need research, or that there was any research to be had in the yoga field. I really didn't connect the two until I started doing a little bit of anatomy in terms of teaching, like you say, and then starting to look things up on a health sciences basis that wasn't linked to yoga, say things like back pain, and look at, and then going, wait, hang on a second, I'm hearing these messages out there, and actually this is what the research is saying, and then putting the two together. And I think that's where the idea of this sort of evidence-based teacher trainings came from, was from my experiences doing health science research and then matching it to the different fields in yoga, movement science based and things like that. So yes, I didn't even occur to me that yoga could have this evidence based, I suppose, base. So definitely.
You were the original Yoga Meets Movement Science.
I don't know about that. The stories I could tell you, which I won't tell you now, but I'm not exaggerating, I went on a holiday skiing in Switzerland, and I spent 8 out of the 10 days trying to find out why teacher said that your arm must be in external rotation when you take it over your head, because I couldn't find the reason. And my friends and my husband are like, get out of the flat, come and ski. And so I went down this dark tunnel. It was a dark, good tunnel with a light at the end, but it was like, it really was all the things that I've been taught and heard, trying to find out what the root was, and there was nothing about yoga at all, in terms of so yes, so that a lot of that happened putting the trainings together, and still does.
I love that story.
It's really true. I have witnesses.
I love that so much. And I can so relate too. Like when you have some sort of question come up, especially I think we yoga geeks can just kind of relate on this, but it's just like you said, something about like, well, do we need to consciously externally rotate the arm when it's overhead? Is that important, and why? It can take us down such a rabbit hole. And I love that you admitted that it took you on an 8-day rabbit hole when you should have been skiing. You are perfect for this. Yeah, right.
Because nobody bothered to say, well, it just goes up into extent, like it wasn't a thing. So that made it even harder to find out what the cause and core. That's a whole other story. That took me 4 weeks of just like mind blowing. Oh no, that everything I know is wrong, and it was years ago, and no one believed me, and still sometimes don't believe me anyway. Yeah, so that's that, but in all fairness, that's really what keeps me doing the trainings is just this constant check, dig, keep up to date, listening to you, both of you, yes, and learning so much as well.
That is amazing to hear. And thank you for reminding us about your health science background, because actually when I was looking up what we were going to say for your bio, I remember seeing that and making a mental note like, oh, we need to say that. And then I forgot. So we didn't actually say that in the introduction. But I believe it's just so interesting to think of how someone can be like have a full-on research background in a different field and maybe not necessarily like see the relevance of that type of looking into things for something like yoga, maybe because just we tend to be taught the yoga practices we're taught it. Maybe we just take it for granted. We're just like, this is yoga, but it's such an eye-opening processed her. I love how you describe that, how you realize like, well, actually there is research on the human body and on movement, and we can actually like start to apply this, right?
Exactly. And at the time I put the trainings together, I actually was doing Iyengar yoga. I've gone from different
Oh,
styles
yes.
to, everything. And but big into Iyengar yoga, and you know how alignment driven Iyengar yoga is. And I think
Mhm.
in my head I got confused from this emphasis on alignment that they were doing, and I got it confused with being safe. That if, you were doing a
Yes.
headstand and one of your arms is slightly, lifted higher than the other, your scapula a little bit higher, that was inherently dangerous. And so I had lots of that information, as to go to like 2 hours advanced Iyengar classes. I mean, you have to align your little finger. So I think
Yeah.
you really do. It's like, what, lift this kidney and lift that, and your whole mind is like, whoa, what's going on? And I mean, I loved it. I had a fantastic teacher, but I think I got confused by, with
Yeah.
these constant alignment cues that they were to do with being safe and being that
Yes.
I wouldn't injure. And and I can't really remember if my teacher then said, and I don't think she did. I don't think she said you have to do that to protect your neck in headstand, for example. I think she just
Mhm.
said that bit skew, make it straight. It was for asymmetry. I don't think there was a language in the Iyengar around safety as much as there was in the Vinyasa flow world, which is what I was also doing on the side and trained in, again, another
Mhm.
style. And there was much
Mhm.
more of a message there. Make sure, you do this for safety. So I think
Right.
my mind was very full of instruction from both of those worlds, and not really thinking about, well, hang on a sec, why in the Iyengar world is it just
Yeah.
asymmetry there or symmetry that they are after? And in the Vinyasa flow world, is that different instructions? Because they're sort of the same, but I think maybe for different reasons. I don't know what Iyengar's like
Mm.
now, But yes,
Right.
so that's when I started to really notice, hang on, what are people saying here in different yoga styles as well?
Right. Across styles. And you mentioned already your experience with Iyengar, Ashtanga, and even Vinyasa flow styles. And I know we're about to dive into actually scope of practice, but I just had one other question for you about your background, just kind of filling that out a bit. Is I know you told me in some of our conversations that you've also, and I think this was like quite a few years ago, but you would go on like the yoga journal conference circuits. Like you would go to like it's kind of like a different era maybe in the yoga world. I don't think Yoga Journal really does these big conferences anymore, but and maybe I'm wrong about that, but from my memory it was like there'd be a city like Estes Park, Colorado, is in my mind as one that they would always do. And then they would invite all these big super famous yoga teachers to these conferences, and then they would, just like a conference in another field that would just be they'd give presentations all throughout the day. As an attendee, you would go to the classes or the workshops that you'd want to go to, and you just get little bits, little bite-sized experiences with these different like famous yoga teachers. Am I right that you at least went to one Yoga Journal conference,
I've been
maybe
to
more?
quite a few, not just Yoga Journal, but quite a few conferences in the States, but because we don't really get that in the UK, and especially back
Mhm.
then when you didn't really get workshops. I used to go to the States. I really love the States, by the way. I actually got married
Yes,
in the States, so
you
yeah, I've been
did.
to the States
Didn't
a
know that.
lot of times. And I used to go to, if there was a conference, when I mean near-ish, like a 2 hour plane journey from where I was going in the States, then I would go. So yes, I've
Got
seen
it.
a lot of different people over there. And I think the last conference I went to was the Northwest, is it the
Oh
Northwest Yoga
yes,
Conference in Seattle? I think they hold
yes.
a big conference there. So yeah, I mean, I can't remember all the names, but Mazzy Ezrati,
Oh
Amy
yeah,
Ippolito, Jason
yes.
Crandall,
Hmm,
Tiffany
hmm.
Cruikshank, the Jivamukti people,
Yes.
lots of Catherine Buddig, I think, when she was around. So I used to
Mhm.
go, and as I got more evidence based, I used to get more and more shocked by what people was. And I was like, oh, you can't. And also going to conferences, the Northwest being one of them, not that it was the conference's fault, but going from teacher to teacher to teacher for 2-hour workshops, they're all in those little slots, and being taught the same thing, handstand in particular, was one, and being taught absolutely, totally differently by teachers all around safety and alignment cueing. Like, without naming names, things like your scapula must be depressed, drawn down your back in handstand, and really, really, and I would like, what? I'm very confused that people don't understand this. So it was a big eye opener, and a big the yoga journey for me in terms of teachers has been quite an interesting journey, right from the Shivananda teachers in the beginning to you now, Jenni.
Catherine,
it's true. Yes,
honored you would say that.
But it's really eye-opening experience, and definitely, I suppose everybody's yoga journey changes depending on what knowledge they gain on the way, movement practices they like. I love strength-based stuff, as you know, and strength yoga, that kind of thing. So, things I've directed in a different way because of that, and wanting things to be as evidence-based as possible. So, yes.
Thank you so much for speaking to your experience around that. I think that really helps set like a good background for, like what you've seen in the yoga world and over time and how you've evolved personally. And before I ask you this question about scope of practice, I just remembered one more important thing I need to say, which is that when I first discovered you on social media, like found your Instagram account, I don't think you say this anymore in your Instagram bio, but what you said back then was that you learned to handstand press at age, and I think it might have been 52, something like that. But it was one of the things that stood out about you is that you like taught yourself, like you learned and you trained and you got a handstand press, which that's a really hard thing to do in case listeners don't know. Place your hands on the floor and just float your legs up into handstand rather than like kicking up or jumping up. And it's a very impressive feat. And you, Catherine, at beyond the age of 50, I don't remember the exact age, but you learned to do, like, that's the age where you learned to do a handstand press. So I think that's super cool.
I think maybe insane is the word more than super cool. I mean, I was like in England we'd say barking mad. I was like a barking mad person for, I think it was 2.5 years it took me to learn that stupid thing.
I can attest to this because I met you shortly after you learned it, and you were just like, you were practicing hours, like just you refused to not learn it, right? You were like, no matter how hard it was going to be, you were going to do it. And then you, just to maintain it, you also had to keep practicing and keep practicing and keep practicing. And I admired, I was like, it's hard for anybody to learn. I've dabbled in it. I don't do it nearly as nice as you. But it's like, so it's hard for anybody to learn. And then for someone who's a woman and in her 50s, right? Like most people would call you crazy. They would just be like, that's not possible. and it was impossible until you did it, right? Which was just amazing.
And I haven't done, I think last year was the last time I did it because I just haven't, I'm not in that space for putting that, because that's all you do. There's nothing else. And then
there's no time to do anything else because it takes so many hours to practice that. Hours
and hours and hours. But thank you. Yes, I was very glad I achieved it. And maybe one day I'll go back to it again. I don't know. But it's a lot of dedication, put it like that.
That makes so much sense. But anyway, I'm just very impressed by you for many reasons, and that's one of them. Yes. So maybe shifting our focus a little more to this scope of a yoga teacher scope of practice. I guess maybe our first question for you about this is, Catherine, could you maybe tell us what you formerly thought that a yoga teacher scope of practice was, like maybe back in some of the days where you were describing like your earlier time in the yoga world, and then maybe we could contrast that with what your opinion is on a yoga teacher's scope of practice today.
Pre-DVD and post-DVD.
That's so funny and true.
Right. Exactly. I like that.
It's so funny. I think, I mean, in the very early days, there was just nothing. That's what I said. I hadn't thought about that until I was chatting now. That with the traditional, I keep using that word, but Shivananda, Iyengar, Ashtanga, there really wasn't any kind of queuing around scope of practice. Just people like pulling you into poses and lying on top of you and do that. I mean, it really was like that.
Literally,
Literally,
yeah.
It really was. It was like, you're in a forward bend, I'm now going to lie on you. And I liked it, which is weird.
Right. I did too. Yeah.
Yeah, it was just like, get on with it. It was just, they had a load of nonsense as well, of course, in terms of queuing, but it was, sorry, I'm probably not allowed to, but it was just like, do the poses. And if you can't, just keep doing them, and then hopefully you'll get there. So there was I had no thought about it, but it was when I got into vinyasa flow and then started teaching when I was practicing Iyengar and vinyasa flow, and then started teaching, and I really believed that I had to ask my classes if they had, before the class, if they had any injuries. Or I used to say something like, does anybody have any injuries or any problems that they wish to share? Or we don't really use the word issues here. It's more, and then, and everybody would be standing looking at me, and I would ask this quite blunt question because every other yoga teacher did. And so I'd ask it, and then some people would put their hands up and say, I've got X, I've got this, and then I would not really say anything terribly helpful and maybe keep an eye on them for, depending on what they had. I used to get people to fill in forms, not just, get this signed off by your medical practitioner, but do you have any medical problems? Make a list. And then I'd get the form before the class and not read it, and then read it after the class. So I don't think it was very fair, whatever I was doing. It was just something I felt like I had to do, that I had to keep people, that by asking that question and then being able to keep an eye on that person with a disc herniation, that somehow I was keeping them safe. And I kind of think I felt like I knew about injuries, and I really didn't know anything at all. I mean, not at all. Like when I think of the things I used to advise people to do. So I really come from that right at the beginning of teaching, that point of view of, asking about injuries, keeping people safe, and then sometimes even sort of go, well, I think, you've got a bit of a shoulder issue. It's definitely a rotator cuff issue. You should go and do these exercises, your external rotator. I mean, I really did do that right in the beginning. So 14, 15 years ago, that's what I used to do. And then I started putting the trainings together. And then I was like, oh my word, Catherine, you know nothing about what is going on. You know what it's like. It's you don't know. Like you're diagnosing somebody with a rotator cuff injury. Right. It's like, you know nothing. How, that's just ridiculous. Yes. It took me quite a while, and because of the trainings, to get to that point of, wait, hang on a second, so from there, asking, diagnosing, sometimes treating as well.
Yes.
And then that genuinely, honestly, to now where I try very hard not to do that. As we spoke about, because now I don't teach classes, I only do teacher trainings. So there is a little bit of a conversation around injury in our classes, in the trainings, but it's slightly different. Yeah. But definitely a huge change from when I first started teaching.
Yeah. Thank you for outlining that. And of course, I can relate, and I know many other people can too. And when I think back to some of the things that I thought I was qualified to do in my yoga classes and with my yoga students, like it's like this, I don't know, naivete or something. And then once you learn more, then you realize, exactly as you said, you begin to realize how much you don't actually know. And you Absolutely. Are, at least, I feel like we become humbled. and then maybe learn to like hone our focus on the areas where maybe we actually are qualified to have expertise. So
Absolutely.
I think we'd love to get back to what you mentioned about yoga teachers asking that question at the beginning of class, like, does anyone have an injury? I think we want to get back to that because that's a really good meaty topic to dive into. But could you do you have like a sense, and I know you just taught scope of practice in one of your yoga teacher trainings just the other day, but do you have a sense of what you would lay out today as far as like what you tell your teacher trainees? What is their scope of practice, like in simple terms? And of course, this is just all of our opinion, your opinion. We know there's no official regulatory body, but what do you consider to be within a yoga teacher's scope of practice? I know that's going to launch us into talking, like going more in depth, but just on a summarized level, what are yoga teachers qualified to teach?
Yoga. That's it. I mean, it's really simple. It's, the question I said to the 200 hours is, you coming towards the end of your 200 hours. What have you learned on your 200 hours to do?
Right.
To
Good
teach
question.
yoga, they all said. Not me prompting them. And what does that, what is that made up of? And they like, we put together a class, we put a sequence, we teach and cue the sequence, etc. That's it. We are allowed to teach meditation, breath work, poses, and we can offer modifications. And then somebody actually said before all that came out, somebody said, when I said, what does that mean? What is it comprised of? They said it's not comprised of diagnosing or being a medical practitioner. And so to me, it's quite simple. It's you trained on a 200 hour to put a sequence together. We train pose demonstration so you can teach pose cueing, teaching skills, right? We teach you how to do more poses, to look at other people's poses in terms of a movement science perspective, like strength, skill, flexibility. What do they have? What do their range of movement? All of that stuff. Put the class together. Sorry, not my mic. And then teach the class, be nice, warm, and then go home. So to me, it sounds very harsh. Within that, of course, there's subtleties, lots of subtleties, and there's a lot of stuff we can do, not to go into that yet. But you being trained to teach yoga, not to do differential diagnosis on somebody's shoulder pain. You're not qualified to do that. So it's as simple as that for me. And Yoga Alliance is like, there's nothing in there. I even show them what the Yoga Alliance says, and it's not really anything to do with what we would look at as scope of practice that even fitness professionals have in most countries. I'm sure, they generally have a scope of practice blocked, what you do and what you don't do, which is prescribed, treat, rehab, all of those kind of things. And we don't, and I've done so many Google searches every time I teach it to see what the difference is between what comes up if I ask for fitness professionals scope of practice, or even Pilates scope of practice, although I don't agree with their scope. But yoga, there's nothing. It's honestly, Jenni, you come up with your scope of practice blog. I know Google gives me. Yeah, but there's nothing else. I mean, there's no nice little form that says do and don't. There's just not.
That is so interesting. And thanks for mentioning that blog post. Yeah, that's something that Travis and I did together. It was this interview project where we, once again, kind of in a similar vein to this conversation, we realized that there is no official, like you just said, there's no set scope, like in a legal sense, but we wanted to get opinions from a wide range of instructors out there on what they thought. And so it was like just an interview series where we asked them all the same question, and then they answered, and you could just see by comparing their answers how the opinions can kind of vary. That was like our point with that. We'll link that in the show notes for anyone who's interested. It's kind of in line with this conversation. But that's so funny, Catherine, that when you Google yoga teacher scope of practice, that is one of the things that comes up. Like
it's interesting to me too, because as a fitness professional, we have the same issues with what is our scope, or like you said, Catherine, it's out there, but then actually internalizing it and then living it. So we have issues with people understanding what the scope is and sometimes overstepping it. And so I see this from my perspective, and then I wonder about it with yoga, and it's like, my goodness, we have enough trouble, and ours is clearly written out. And different. We have different governing bodies. It's a little bit lawless, not as lawless as yoga, but then to say, well, there's nothing. Right. Oh my goodness, that would be really hard to figure out how to fit in and what to do if there was nothing telling me, I can do this or I can't.
Exactly. I like being called lawless. I'm a lawless yoga teacher.
It's the Wild West.
That's brilliant. Yeah, but there is nothing. Well, I mean, not that I've spent hours and hours trying to find it, but I mean, you'd imagine it would come up quickly on a Google image search or whatever.
I agree.
And I don't think it gets talked about, really. Not that I've never been, none of the trainings that I've done, bearing in mind I haven't done one for quite a while, talk about scope of practice in the UK and here. I haven't done a training in the States.
Yeah, in my experience in the trainings that I've done in the US, I have not. No, that has not been brought up for us. I did, in preparation for this conversation, I did go on the Yoga Alliance website and just review, because they do. Again, they're not a regulatory body; they're just a registry, but they do still outline like their idea about what scope of practice should be for a yoga teacher. And I know it sounds like you discussed that in your teacher trainings as well. But I just noticed. Maybe I'll just really quickly, for the benefit of our audience who may not be familiar, they've got 6 points. Maybe I'll just read through those really quickly because might be helpful. So what is Yoga Alliance's definition of a yoga teacher's scope of practice? Number 1, follow the Yoga Alliance Code of Conduct. Number 2, teach yoga, as you said, Catherine. Number 3, adjust posture or practice with explicit and informed consent. Number 4, share yogic philosophy, history, and anatomy. Number 5, this is where I feel like there are a lot of questions that could be asked about this. This is where it's, to me, kind of unclear. Advise and teach within permitted scope. But that's all that it says.
That's the whole point.
And yeah, and I think that's also referring to if you have other credentials, like if you're also a physiotherapist or a physical therapist, maybe you can. That was a little bit of my impression. I still feel like it's vague. It's like, if you're telling yoga teachers what they can do, to me, it seems like it would be helpful to outline maybe what they can't do, maybe that helps us, if we see what we're not supposed to do, then it makes, in contrast, we can better see what we should. And I just to finish off with their scope, Yoga Alliances, there were 6. So the number 6 was maintain relevant credentials. Again, I think if you're a yoga teacher and you're also, say, a nutritionist or something, then maintain those credentials if you're gonna. So Catherine, in hearing you talk about this, I feel like you have referenced, and I see this a lot myself, and I know Travis does, you've referenced yoga teachers maybe trying to like diagnose or treat or handle students' pain and injury as something that you see quite a bit, that I believe that you see as outside a yoga teacher's scope of practice, because we don't learn how to do that within a yoga teacher training. I'm wondering, are there other, so I think that's a huge one and like a big one to focus on is that, but are there other things you see yoga teachers do on a regular basis that also seem like they're yoga teachers like not staying within their lane? Like other ways, like maybe nutrition advice, maybe helping with wanting to help with psychological conditions, things like that. Do you see other examples as well?
I see all of those things.
Yeah.
When we ask that question, about do you ask about injuries, and we have a discussion around the kind of physical problems that people might have, then I ask about, what do you do if a client starts to cry in a class? And I would say that the vast majority will say they will stop the class, or they will go and sit down with the person and have a conversation, or take the person aside afterwards and find out what is going on and approach it. And it's not it's more than just a caring. I mean, it's all coming from the intention of caring. That's what all the yoga teachers are. They're coming from that intention. But it's more about what the yoga teacher can offer to help them fix their psychological problem at that particular time, or emotional problem at that time. So I see that a lot of belief of that the role of the yoga teacher isn't what I've just said, which is to teach yoga, to do your class and then be warm and friendly and chat. It actually can encompass emotional well-being advice. It can encompass what you should be eating. It can encompass the fact that your neck is sore because your posture is not right, and the fact that the classic things that you're sleeping incorrectly, or it's just much bigger than come in and teach yoga. Yes.
Thank you for speaking to those examples, because I think kind of maybe naming some of these tendencies that we see can also be helpful just for our listeners, and kind of getting a little more solidified around some of the types of ways that we see yoga teachers maybe taking on some roles that are beyond just the role of a yoga teacher. I wonder what you think, Catherine, about like this, talking about yoga teachers helping in terms of maybe sort of counseling on emotional well-being and things like that. Do you see, I see sometimes like with talk about trauma in the yoga world. Now I know that that's there's like trauma sensitive yoga, which is one thing, like teaching yoga in a context in which we're being sensitive to people who may have trauma and not wanting to trigger them or do things that can increase that sensitivity. So that's like one way that we might approach it. But in another sense, I often see something like trauma brought into a yoga class where it's like the class that the teacher is teaching can actually help with that trauma or help resolve the trauma or treat the trauma. I feel like I see that come in. We did a whole podcast episode on polyvagal theory. Do you remember that, Travis? Which is often combined with yoga and taught by yoga teachers who are not necessarily like licensed mental health professionals, and taught in a way that it's not trauma sensitive. That's different. Like I feel like that is more evidence-based, but it's more like we're using polyvagal theory in yoga so that you can resolve your trauma. I feel like I see that. Is that something that you come across, Catherine, in like what you experienced in the yoga world?
I come across it more from within the yoga trainees themselves, especially on not so much 200 hours, but the 300, 500 hours, wanting to be involved, and some of them may be going on to do so, wanting to be involved in yoga therapy. That kind of, I see trauma thrown about that word a lot in two different ways. If I go to not normal classes, but like public classes out there, not so much that the class is structured around trauma, but that a yoga teacher may say to someone or witness people saying that the reason that you are in pain, or the reason, the classic, we know, that your hips aren't open or that you're there is because you have stored trauma that needs to be released. That kind of conversation around which I always, talk to the trainees about and say it's not only is it you don't know, but it's also quite judgmental. It's like, well, hips aren't open, therefore something is blocked. Something is so it's emotionally judgmental, I feel, to say things, because it's never a positive thing. It's always a negative. You are blocked. You are storing negative trauma. So there's that side of the trauma things, and then there's trainees that go on to do. I don't have many of them, but have gone on to do yoga therapy with the big institute. I think it's International Yoga Therapists, and that is much more. I haven't been to a class taught by a yoga therapist because it's not my thing, but that is much more from those. I would teach the class with polyvagal theory in mind, and I've looked at their website and gone through a lot of blogs and gone, oh, wow, this is it's no evidence. I mean, it's pretty astounding. Sorry, I call it like it is. It's
I love that you're so
but
correct.
it really is that you can't say. I mean, it's and quite serious complaints like depression and, you know, psychological issues that are potentially dangerous, you know, to
Yes. Oh,
face with.
yeah.
We talk about it a lot on the 300 hour. Like last year on our 300 hour, we actually had in a psychologist who specializes in PTSD and an occupational therapist who works within a multidisciplinary group with PTSD. And I got them in because so many people wanted to do their research project on yoga and PTSD. And so I got in specialists to really tell people what it is like to work with people with PTSD, that it is a very risky thing, both for the person and for the teacher as well, and to really understand it. But that there really was a belief, or is a belief, that yoga helps with PTSD. And, you know, as we go to Yoga Journal, yoga helps with depression, anxiety, sciatica, knee problem. I mean, it's almost, I've got a screenshot. There's about 22 things that it says yoga for, you know.
100%. That you're talking Yoga Journal, like this
Yoga
supposedly
Journal,
authoritative magazine.
So I think yoga teachers are I see that yoga teachers are really, really confused, and they come to the trainings confused because they hear this language and they read in Yoga Journal, Yoga International, you know, those big, huge magazines, or I don't know what, multimedia magazines now. They read these things that is more, but yoga is good for PTSD and it's great for depression, and it's why can't I bring that into my class? And then they hear, you know, your hips are not open, flexible enough because you have stored trauma, that, you know, so this language, I suppose, in lots of different ways, depending on the teacher and the class, that trainees come and they've heard and they believe, I suppose.
It's so tricky, like, for all the things that you mentioned, because like you said, yoga can be good for many of those things. But then like Jenni and I had Paul Ingram on the podcast. I don't know, Jenni, you might know the episode, but talked about yoga for low back pain. But that it's applicable to any of those things. Yoga in general can be helpful for many of those things. But then, and so maybe you read it on the Yoga Journal website and you see that, and then you come into yoga teacher training and it's like, well, why can't I teach a yoga for low back pain class? Or why can't I teach a yoga for anxiety class? And it's like, well, hold on. Like you just said, well, we brought in experts who work with people with PTSD. This is complicated. This is tricky. This shouldn't be taken lightly. So to assume that, well, I took a 200 hour, I know yoga is good for X, therefore I'm going to teach a class where I believe that I'm treating X. It's problematic. But it's not surprising why you see it. It's like, you can teach people who have back pain, but you can't but it's all about the way that you do it. The narrative, like you said at the beginning, what do yoga teachers do? They teach yoga. And then let that, you know, fall as it may for the person in the room, whatever they're going through, but don't try to make it more than you're qualified to make it.
Yeah, and it's always, I think that the yoga for anxiety, you can teach people with depression, with anxiety, with lower back problems, with etc., and yoga does amazing things. Movement does amazing things. Breath work does amazing. Or, you know, we know this, but it's working with clients, not patients. Clients with them, and not being frightened. Oh, you know, they've come in and said, I've got a serious anxiety disorder, but I really want to do the yoga class. Teach them. It's okay. So you can teach the person with anxiety, but you don't have to cure the anxiety. It might get helped, or it might not get helped, as you know. You know, I showed 2 screenshots from Cochrane reviews, you know, the big database on movement, because there wasn't a lot of yoga, where it's talking about lower back pain. One of the big reviews, probably I think quite recent, 2022, and it's saying that exercise shows up that it's really good, but not really good, bad wording, but helpful, low to moderate certainty, you know, as they say, for lower back pain compared to no treatment, other, I don't know, physiotherapy, that kind of thing. I can't remember the exact same thing. And then one that is fibromyalgia, flexibility training, worse for fibromyalgia, you know, and I show these two things and say that we can't tell. We're yoga teachers. If a byproduct of our yoga, you know, with modifications, etc., helps the person with anxiety, lower back pain, whatever, fantastic. But it's the two things are very different. I mean, there's so many nuances there, but it's as though yoga teachers really don't believe that what they're doing is good enough anyway.
Yes,
I think it really is good enough. I'm absolutely passionate about it, movement in general. You know, so it's almost that's what I want to get through, is what you've learned to do and what you can offer is amazing for people with a whole load of things. And it might not be for some people. And it's not in your power to work that out. Just be a good yoga teacher. And then, you know, all the byproducts of the teaching yoga. Sorry, that was a very long answer to, I can't even remember the question.
That was it. You were on fire.
Sorry. I know awesome answers.
Thank you. I think you laid that out so well, and it just helps because it does get confusing, and some of this language can be hard to understand the distinction. Like yoga for low back pain is one thing versus a yoga class, and people with low back pain might take it. Like that's kind of two different approaches. And how are we treating that, and how are we handling that? How is yoga interacting with that? But I think you spoke to that really well, and trying to fine tune how we see those distinctions, because it's important. And then I love how you also talked about how it seems like maybe yoga teachers sometimes, maybe one of the reasons that we tend to see a lot of this like stepping outside of our lanes as yoga teachers is because there may be this underlying belief that teaching yoga is not enough. And I think that's really important to speak to. Do you feel, Catherine, like if you had yoga teacher trainees kind of express that or seem that might be what's going on for them? Like, do you feel like that is a tendency?
I don't know that I've had anybody use those words, that it's not enough. Those are my words from what I've seen. It seems to me that there's two things I think going on, is that I think yoga teachers, or the ones that come to be trained by me, are really worried about things. They really, it's quite interesting. They are so worried that they are going to hurt somebody in yoga, or that somebody's going to come with a particular problem, which is why they have to ask about injuries. And if they don't ask, then they're going to hurt that person more. So there's and I think I said to Jenni, excuse me, before, that, you know, in the UK and in South Africa, we're not a litigious society. People don't sue each other. No one has insurance. It's like, you know, I mean, it really is pretty much not UK a little bit stricter than here, but here, if you work in a big gym, yes, you have to have insurance, but otherwise not, and no one cares. And so their concern isn't coming from, you know, being sued or etc. They really, really worry that somehow yoga is inherently dangerous. That you know, I want to come. People will say to me, "I want to come and learn yoga, and I like that you are movement science based, and I like your evidence based, because then I can learn to teach yoga safely." Is what, and I think, oh no, that's not going to work. Yeah, and then I have to have a long conversation on the phone and say, okay, this is what my approach is, and then normally they're fine. But it's really like they think the science is going to give them the information to teach safely, because yoga is dangerous. So there's a big conversation around that. And then on top of that, there's also, so yoga is dangerous and I could hurt you in a yoga class, but then it's almost contradictory. Then but yoga's so good for so many things. You know, it's good for lower
That's
back pain. It's
so
good for
true.
sciatica. It's good for anxiety. And I'm like, these are
Catherine,
contradictory
that's a really good
statements.
point.
It's like, if you believe that yoga is good for lower back pain, then you really have no worries in a general yoga class where everybody signed off and said, I'm fine. You're not going to injure. So, I don't know where I mean, maybe it's the magazines, maybe it's the teachers, maybe it's just the general language. I have a theory it comes from lower back pain and Pilates and all of that core stuff that happened however many years ago. But the language is there of protection, and then the healing language as well, which is a different side of yoga. But
Yes.
I mean, I laughed on Sunday. I just did a screenshot for them. Yoga Journal. I think it was yoga for depression. And the first picture on the main little thumbnail picture of it is somebody in Matsyasana in fish pose with their head
Oh,
on the
yeah.
block.
It's like a back
And
bend where you're lying back.
back bend for depression. I'm just,
Oh,
I don't even know where to go. Is it because it's a heart opener? Is it because it's on the blocks on somewhere on your nerve? I mean, I really genuinely have no, they probably don't know either. Sorry, no, I'm not even apologizing to Yoga Journal anymore. So, but then a trainee will see pictures like that and go, oh, wow,
yes.
maybe we can't do wheel pose or, I don't know, bridge even because it's dangerous, but fish pose with a block is great for depression. What I'm saying is, and again, in my very, very long, boring way, is that
No,
it's confused. It's so confused. The message out there around, which makes scope of practice really interesting, I think, is because of these confused messages,
Yeah, so many sensationalist headlines.
Yes, clickbait.
In both directions, right? Yoga's great for this, but yoga will hurt you this way.
Yes, and you know what I've got, but I must check if it's still there because it's probably from a couple of years ago. I'm teaching people how to do what Google does in terms of searches, in terms of confirmation bias. Got a screenshot, yoga for osteoporosis. Yoga is good for osteoporosis, and then yoga is bad for osteoporosis. And the same seven poses come up for both. So they come with, I think there's a couple more in the bad for ones, but there's seven poses that come up with it's good for osteoporosis, and it also comes up with bad for osteoporosis. So, I mean, poor yoga teachers, they haven't got a clue, unless they've gone and done a load of research, unfortunately. And they just want to look after people. Generally, that is it's not a kind of, oh, I need to be seen as better than. It is a real concern to help heal or prevent injury. That's my impression anyway from the trainees.
That makes a lot of sense. And it's true. I think that a lot of some of these tendencies come from just like a genuine care and genuine wanting to like take care, like you said, take care of people and keep people safe. And that's totally commendable. Like it makes a lot of sense why we might think some of these things about a yoga teacher's scope of practice or want to be able to operate in certain domains. I have a question for you based on something you said a few moments ago, which is that, because I feel like I see this tendency a lot too. But if you have someone call you who's maybe interested in your yoga teacher training and they say, I know that your reputation is that your yoga training is very movement science-based and evidence-based, and therefore that's good because I know that'll help me keep my yoga students safe. And like I tend to get that feedback a lot too, because I kind of have that reputation for having kind of what anatomy / biomechanics, movement science based style of yoga. And people will often say just on a superficial level, therefore I know Jenni's yoga classes are safe. Like they'll say that. And I don't put that message out there, but it's like this interpretation, like, well, if they know movement science, they must know how to keep me safe. It's like those people mesh the two together. So I guess I'm wondering, Catherine, if like I was on the phone as a yoga teacher training interested student and I was like, hey, your training will teach me how to keep everyone safe more than these other ones that are not movement science based. I know it's such a big complex topic, but you do say something to them on the phone to try to like change their mind or help them see that more clearly. Like what would you say to me if that's what I said? Like your training is going to help me keep people safe?
It really depends on how they come at the question. And it also depends, strangely enough, if they're a health professional, because I get a lot of physios and what we call biokineticists here, which are exercise specialists and doctors, GP. So it depends on which one it is. But as a rule, I will say, yes, I am movement science-based, evidence-based. And I explain what we teach. So I don't turn around and say, oh, no way, I'm not going to teach you how to keep people safe.
Right. It's going to be dangerous.
Nonsense. I talk about how we approach offering different modifications for people within a yoga class setting and how we look at that. And I talk about it from the trainee's point of view, as in how we're going to teach them different poses for their individual body. And then I talk about how that then translates, they start to learn about that and how we can learn about things like progressive overload and pain science. And we can do a whole lot, depending, I might not even say pain science, it really depends on who I'm talking to, but progressive overload, I use different words, regress things and progress things, etc., etc. So I talk from what I'm going to teach them, but keep it as simple as possible. And I can't really, you can't say I'm not going to keep people safe. It's just
right.
You just can't. The intention is, it's much more about learning how to teach yoga in a progressive way for me. So using movement science principles like progressive overload, it's a simple example I would give them is, when you learn chaturanga in a class, like normally the teacher just says, okay, chaturanga, and then you kind of collapse into it, and then downward dog, and we do a lot with our arms and stuff. And then I said, what we teach is how to build up to chaturanga, how to build up these things to make your arms strong so that you are able to confidently hold yoga poses that use your arms. So it's more like that. That's how I would explain it. Basically progressive overload, but in a very, we build up strength and flexibility and your skill for poses, talking to the trainee, and we teach you how to do that within a yoga class, a yoga sequence, and to be able to read your people to a certain degree. That's the language, but fairly vague because they're big words for, it's jargon mostly for 200-hour trainees who are calling.
That makes so much sense. Thank you for kind of outlining that. It's like, this question of safety in yoga. When what you were talking about earlier in this episode, in your experience kind of in the yoga world, in the, as Travis called it, the pre-DVD days, it seemed like you were picking up a lot of, and I know this is still totally the prevalent working model today, but a lot of language around alignment is what we use in yoga to keep everyone safe. And because we believe that alignment is what assures safety, that's like why alignment is so important. And that's why you have so many yoga styles that are alignment based. But it sounds to me like you kind of present a different model of safety, which has less to do with like specific and nitty gritty alignment being correct or incorrect. Maybe more is about like just building, like you said, strength and capacity over time with a great working knowledge of what it means to regress and progress movements so that students can be taught. Because when they build strength over time, they naturally will become more resilient. And injury is a really big, complex topic, I know, but when we build strength, that can help prevent injury to an extent. So that kind of work, it's like a different model, right? Wouldn't you say, like, or a different paradigm for working with the body when you teach yoga that way?
I think so, compared to the way I see it being taught, which is, very much about nocebo cueing, your postures, you've got an overarched lower back, don't, because you're going to get back problems, knee over ankle, all the things, keep your shoulders down, all of that language around it. It's a very much, I always think of it, I always use chaturanga, I always think it's a great example. And if you do general Google searches on it, it's like, don't do chaturanga this way, don't flare your elbows out, don't, and then, it's, first of all, those are all incorrect. You can have your elbows out, we know that, but it's like, it's all very well to say that, but if you don't have the strength to hold the position in the first place, you can't do the tick because you just can't. You collapse to the ground, you know. So it's just, and I feel like yoga is very much, frequently, not all the time, taught in that kind of don't way, you know. Don't you know, have an overarched spine, don't have your shoulders down, don't have your knee over your ankle, etc., etc. It's very much, but you know, your shoulders will injure in chaturanga, so don't have them that, rather than a, well, okay, that's fine, but how do I do the other, you know, how do I have the strength for chaturanga, or to hold a downward dog where my shoulders feel comfortable, or, you know, my wrists in all the arm balances and planks and things that we do, you know, how do I get wrists? And I know we can't always do it with progressive overload, but how do my wrists get used to this? You know, what movement science principles can I put into a class that over time may help with those things? It might not, but at least there's some thought going on behind it, rather than, well, just don't do it, you know. That kind of thing.
Totally, like the big red X, just like avoid the movement entirely, versus there being a more positive way we could approach it, which is like you could build up to that movement, and it's just like a bigger picture thing.
A bigger, you know, use the example with chaturanga, sorry, of going, you know, if you went to a fitness trainer, a personal trainer, and you said, I would really like to learn how to do push-ups, they're not going to make you do a whole load of push-ups that you can't do and then say, don't do that. It's like, well, you can't do it, and you set your shoulders a little bit forward. No, we're just not going to go anywhere near. They're going to go, okay. And we asked the 200, so what would they do? And they go, well, you could do a push up against the wall and then push up on the chair, and they learn negatives, eccentric work. You know, there's just very normal accepted techniques that you can build it, rather than the don't do it because it's dangerous, I suppose, is the message that often it's out there, you know.
Thank you for explaining that. Right. So it just seems like often, I think you can attest to this too, but in the yoga world, sometimes, because the yoga world tends to be, and this is something we've talked about on the podcast before, tends to be kind of an insular place where a lot of yoga teacher trainings will teach yoga teachers, and then they go on to teach yoga teachers, and it just all stays within the yoga world. It seems rare that they're like less common that there are people like you, Catherine, who step outside of the yoga world to learn from outside, like from exercise science, from the fitness world, from just other movement modalities. But when you take a step out, you realize there are actually all these really clear and like easy to understand and apply regression, like easy in the sense that like just lift up a push up, like elevate your hands. It's not that hard, you know. But in the yoga world, for some reason, I think because we often don't step outside and look to other movement modalities to inform us. We just see there's chaturanga and that's a problem. Like maybe we see it that way, but we don't see these other bigger picture solutions.
Yes, I think so. That definitely is right. And it's amazing. There's just like so many really simple exercise principles that can perhaps be helpful, you know, for us as yoga teachers. And it's quite easy to teach trainees on a 200-hour level. Well, okay, you know, my right knee hurts in Skandasana. What are you going to offer the person if you have time and you're not teaching 40 people in a class? You know what? And it's always the same thing: reduce load, reduce range of motion, reduce repetition, reduce, you know, the time held, the duration. You know, there's relatively easy ways of just going, and not going, don't do it. You know, that's poor 200. They're not allowed to say that. Don't do it. They have to come up with, well, how can you regress it and then progress it again to get, because the person with the wrist things wants to do a downward dog. They don't want to be told, no, they've got to do forearm plank, you know, for the rest of their life.
Dolphin.
There's a way that you can, or they can at home as well, with the help of a health professional, you know, actually start to load wrists, shoulders, etc., whatever the case is. People want to do the thing if possible. They don't want to be stuck, like either doing nothing or regressed, you know. So, and I really don't think it's not all the 200 hours we teach get it, you know. It's really quick. they get it after learning things that, I can do this, and so, and you can do it once you've learned to teach and had experience. You can do it fairly quickly in a class. It's like up, become a bit, reduce it, knees on the floor. I mean, it's, reduce the levers, bring it back. It's not rocket science. It's that you can do it.
Yeah, and you can learn to integrate working with people that way, even in the context of a group yoga class, which I know your yoga teacher training is really empower people with those type of tools. It just sounds like a much more positive and less discouraging approach to help show people what they actually can do, rather than just putting a bunch of red X's on everything.
I hope so.
But I do, yes. But I do have another question. I feel that what you've been describing is really, really helpful in terms of like looking at position, different alignments. Position and alignment are kind of synonyms, like mean the same thing. And looking at how we might manipulate position and alignment to help yoga students find versions of yoga poses that meet them where they're at. So that's like one way of working with alignment or position or posture, we might say. But I'm wondering, Catherine, if you see out there in the yoga world or in the beliefs that some of your teacher trainees come in with, do you see a tendency for yoga teachers to work with posture or alignment in a different way that may be kind of like stepping outside of their scope or stepping out of their lane, which, like the idea of this is maybe a little not so much even within a specific yoga pose, but just yoga teachers looking at students' posture in general and maybe analyzing it, maybe making comments about it, predictions about what it might lead to or what they need to do to correct it. Do you see those kinds of tendencies in yoga teachers? And do you think that's an example of outside of a yoga teacher's scope of practice to be like correcting, like, I mean, kind of like standing day-to-day posture, like that kind of stuff?
I used to do it. I'm being very, I mean, when I say it, like one of my main teachers, well, she is my main teacher, Laura Norton at the moment. When I first started teaching her, she's the most archy, anterior tilty, back bending yoga teacher. And I spent most of the yoga classes yelling at her because she's an Iyengar teacher as well. Like, Laura, stop arching your back. Laura, start it. I mean, that's what I used to do back in 2009 or whatever it was. In my brain that this overarched, backbendy ballet dancer kind of thing was wrong. And I can't honestly remember if it was because I thought she was going to get back pain or it was just an Iyengar that we don't want that look. So I'm not sure, but I used to do it myself. And, and I've seen lots of other teachers talk about not so much the trainees, but they do believe that if you have that type of, the classic anterior tilted pelvis posture, then that is a problem for back pain, and that preferably you have to reduce that to neutral spine and then keep that neutral spine the entire way through your yoga practice, even though you're doing wheel pose or forward bend or whatever. Maintain it somehow. It's a real thing. I had a totally the opposite posture thing. One of my 300 hours a couple of years ago, she didn't do a 200 hour with us because we get way over half that haven't. And she phoned me a couple of weeks into the course and she said, I have to leave the course. And I'm, why? And she said, because she got taught to posterior tilt in every single pose. And now I'm saying you can do whatever your spine does. It's fine. And she couldn't take it. And I had to sit down and say, but look, this is how the spine goes. But it was mind blowing to her because of this belief. She was taught 200 hours by a Pilates teacher and it was a while ago. So, it was very much that posterior tilted, pelvis was good for lower back. So she really believed that just wherever possible, that had to be tight. And it's the same as all the other conversations we've had. It's in the language out there that day-to-day language, forget about even yoga. You're on your cell phone, therefore you're going to get stuck like that forever and your neck's going to hurt. And the same with posture, all of those things. And people just, it's the language of the day, I think, really. It's people come with that and don't really understand, like we talk about how wonderful the spine is and how many ways we do move it compared to a lot of other exercise out of there. We move it, twisting and back bending and forward bending and lateral side. And this is good. This is pelvis tilts in all sorts of ways. But that language around posture is a belief system that if you've got sometimes it gets very confused as to whether it's anterior tilt or posterior tilt, whichever one's bad for what. But there's a belief
I know.
It's bad that somehow that yoga teachers can see what a neutral spine is, which we know you can't. You just can't. And then if people aren't in neutral spine, that they will get back pain. It's like a real affirmed belief, solid belief that it honestly takes quite a long time to. And I don't know if I shift everybody. In all honesty, because it's so like, I can't let that go, because everybody's saying that. Like everybody, my doctors told me that, my physios told me that, it's in the newspapers, it's on social media, it's on, and then there's me going, well, no, it doesn't work like that. So it's
well, there's
really,
you and your research skills, like, there's that part of it.
There's that. And I mean, it does shift a lot of people, but it doesn't. And I think also from a fear-based perspective, they think, well, but if I don't do that, then it's better just to do it just in case, because then maybe no one will injure. So I'm just going to do it anyway. And so it's almost like they erring on the side of safety rather just do it and ignore. Kind of what Catherine's saying is true, but there's no harm in it anyway, that kind of thing,
Right.
Unfortunately.
But no, that's like, it's just easier to kind of default to it because they already know it. And maybe they're like, maybe this isn't necessary, but I'm just going to do it anyway. But maybe that's not taking a step back to appreciate how actually teaching yoga in that way, that's very kind of controlling and correcting posture, may actually have some negative, like it might not just be totally innocuous. It actually could be non-optimal when we take a step back and look at things like the biopsychosocial model of pain and how so much more influences whether we have pain in our body than just alignment and the tissues, but like psychology, beliefs, what people tell us, what we pick up from. It's just like so much goes into all of that. So I think when people maybe know more.
It's fascinating with the differences in the language. So there's the anterior tilt, but with emphasis on like an extreme what people are seeing is the extreme lumbar arch being dangerous for back pain. But then the other thing, and we struggle with this one, to get it out of people's mouths, even by the end of the 200 hour, is this wanting people to be in a neutral spine when they forward bend. So to keep so it's like the back is moving in a totally different way to the arch way, which is also dangerous. And then so lumbar flexion go forward, and Laura, who's the main person, will go, your spine rounds when you fold forward. It is okay. And then I'll come in and do the anatomy of it, and we go, and then we'll see them doing their teaching practice at the end, using terminology that it is, make sure you keep the spine lengthened, make sure you keep a straight line. And then I'm, Laura, they're saying it again. And then we talked about this last week, and she's like, oh, I haven't said it. And I said, I know you haven't, it's language that they're hearing out there that is so ingrained of, forward bending is dangerous for like daily life. Never pick anything up when you forward bend, all of this language plus yoga is dangerous. And then your overarched back is also causing you a back problem. So neutral's like the way to go. Which, and then I tried to explain, say, we can't do a yoga practice. Like, we don't know what it is, but they get confused with that. But we can't do the yoga practice unless we round our spine and twist it and go backwards and let's make
Totally.
that strong. Let's
Yes.
work with that rather. But it's really is that one is a classic. It's now, I think, more prevalent than the lumbar arch anterior tilt thing. This watching that your spine isn't overtly flexed in spinal flexion when you fold forward.
Yeah, and we actually did a whole podcast episode, Travis, with Dr. Sam Spinelli about, and the title is rounding your low back dangerous? I think that's what it is. And Sam talked about the actual research on when you forward bend, the lumbar spine, you can't avoid it. The lumbar spine does round, it flexes. Like the naked eye might not see it, but at a actual vertebral level in the spine, it is happening. So it's just unavoidable. It's like, it's a normal movement of the spine. What's the point in making people afraid of it? Like, of course, just this disclaimer that they're always individuals and people can present with different pain patterns. And so for someone who, when they fold forward, if they do experience some pain sensitivity, then in that individual case, maybe they would want to back off and, work. Like it's there could be individual cases, and that ideally that would be just a temporary time until it calms down again. Then they start to introduce the movement back in. But so just to say, things can be like individualized for a specific person with specific painful issues going on. But on the whole, when we're talking about just like the inherent properties of these movements being dangerous or likely to cause pain, it seems that research really doesn't support so many of the common claims that we hear anyway. But then beyond that, beyond the fact that saying things like that you need to keep a neutral spine in order to stay safe, that doesn't seem to be supported by research. Like that seems wrong. And even in physiotherapy and physical therapy worlds where we also hear those same messages, it's also not supported by science. So there's the fact that that's just not correct. But then there's the question of, well, is it even within a yoga teacher scope to be talking about that either way, like cautioning people about their posture?
I wonder too, like Catherine, with the students, when you point those things out, are they confused? Because then they're like, well, what am I supposed to say? I feel like they're saying, they feel like they have to say something, right? And then you tell them, well, we really can't say that. And they're like, what am I supposed to say? So Jenni and I often say, like, don't say anything at all.
Don't say anything at all. It's something we really teach, is that you can be quiet but especially for new teachers, wow, it's a challenge, because that room is just deafeningly quiet for those 3 seconds that you haven't spoken, and then but I want to, or they speed up and they say, yes, I do think it's filling space, and it just comes out. It's not taught by us, and it's 200 hours later, and it just comes out, I think. And I think you're absolutely right, Travis. It comes out because obviously they've heard that a lot in life, and there's that absolutely have to say something. It cannot be quiet for a while. It's too scary, I think, to be quiet. We try to teach them that actually forward bends is a great time for you to be quiet and quickly check your notes, because people
perfect.
It's a teaching trick. It's like, so quickly check your notes.
I love that.
Yeah, it's it's anything that you can't, where somebody can't see you is the greatest time as a new teacher to go, crap, I can't remember what I'm doing next. That kind of. But I think you're absolutely right. It's filling space, and again, like just trying to make sure everyone's like safe and controlling the safety of the person in front of you.
Right. Like, can you really truly control that? And is pain and injury something that's just much more complex than any one thing that a yoga teacher could like dictate or control?
Completely not. Yes. Yeah.
Catherine, we did, before we start to wrap up here, we wanted to make sure that our listeners know how they can study with you and what your offerings are in general, and that although you're based in Cape Town, South Africa, you actually offer your trainings online, so anyone anywhere can study with you. So I wondered if maybe you could just tell us a little bit about that, and also a couple questions about some specific modules, teacher training modules that you offer, where just I'm not asking the best and most specific question, but like how, like there's some topics that you offer, like back care yoga and yin yoga training. These were some that we had connected about before, where those topics could be taught in a way that may not be so like evidence-based or supported, but that you really go out of your way to treat these topics in a way that really kind of honors the science and what a yoga teacher's scope actually is. So could you maybe just speak to like a couple of these offerings and then just largely let people know about like what you offer in terms of teacher training and that they can study with you?
Yeah. And so we're doing two things. We are speaking for people in the States, and so we get a lot of people from Europe. So but we're in the same time zone as Europe. So we offer our the big trainings, 200 hour, 300, 500 hour. We offer them online and in person at the same time. So it's quite easy to come and I would say they're 50-50, especially the 300 hour, because we get so many people from overseas on those. But what we're also doing at the moment is we're setting up a United Kingdom side of Wellness Connection, and we're going to offer more self-paced and online courses there as well. So it won't make any difference, unfortunately, to the States, except there will be self-paced courses that will be offered. I'm hoping to get it all up and running by September, but I'll send you the website. The website will be up and running, I think, in 2 weeks. So I'll send you details on that. And then on top of that, we offer loads of short courses. We offer yin, pregnancy, aerial, I mean, you name it, Hot 26, all of those with kids, back care, all of those things. And all of them are taught from an evidence-based point of view. So as I mentioned to you, Jenni, for example, with the yin course, because yin has a big mix of Chinese medicine and things like that, and that teachers, I haven't done a yin course myself, so don't quote me on yin. I really haven't done one, even with my own teacher. So my yin teacher, Taryn James, she's an occupational health therapist. She's the most geeky science person I know besides me and you, Jen. I mean, she really is, just in terms of the yoga world, Travis, because I know you are too. But so she talks about the Chinese medicine beliefs around yin, and she talks about meridians, but she presents them, and she says she calls them the fluff around it. So she talks about it but she means it in a nice way. And she says, well, you can use meridians for imagery. You can use, the line of the body. And again, don't quote me on this because I really don't know anything about meridians, but she said you could do it. And then she teaches all the science about the movements of the poses, what they're doing, how you look for people, and all the stuff that we would normally do. She's also a lead teacher on the 500 hours. So it's almost a different way of packaging it. And for the back care, it's back care for people with back problems. So the yoga team always get huge problems, especially on the 500 hour. And it's a very specialized area in terms of the fact that only a few people are that interested in taking it further, in really understanding what's going on with the back, in order that they are comfortable with somebody coming in and saying, I've had a disc herniation, I've got spondylolisthesis, I've got and being comfortable with, go, brilliant, come in, do the yoga class, and I know how to work with you, not cure you. If you feel, and this is the thing, this is the pain science thing as well, in a very simplistic term, it's like I say to teachers, the person's gone onto their Mind Body app, booked a class with you, got into their car or caught a bus or whatever, come to your yoga class with something. Teach them, and it's because the value of, if the person's come in pain, might not cure the pain, might even make it worse, but that's not your responsibility. But what you're offering them is the person wants to move. They want to do yoga. Yes. They want to probably be with other people in the room. Maybe they want a bit of a laugh and a bit of an engagement with you or students as a teacher, because that's warm and friendly and community and all the good stuff that we know. Maybe it's always a maybe, right? Can help with pain. Yes. you know,
Yes.
in a thing. So that's the power that you have. And then on top of it, if you don't freak out when they say they've had a disc herniation a couple of months ago, that will also help. And that you don't have to nocebo cue them, you know, like, be careful. Oh, you're going into an arch. Oh, be careful, you know, because you are worried about it. So it's more that kind of thing, you know. So the courses, the back care course is more from that perspective of things. It's not to be frightened a bit, and also to work with health professionals who sometimes can be good and sometimes not. But it's, you know, it's work and understand, because we get a lot of letters from physios or whatever saying this person's got this, don't do that, don't do this, and most of the teachers don't understand the language, etc. So it's about that, but it's a very niche course for people that are really interested in that. Just having, they don't normally teach a different style of yoga, hatha yoga, more prop yoga anyway, and they kind of often work with elderly people in retirement homes, that sort of thing. I hope that's clear.
Definitely. And I think that's really helpful just to give people a sense of how they, like, maybe someone has a yoga teacher training program they run. This is helpful for them to get some ideas for how they might, incorporate themes like back care or low back pain, or how they might treat like styles of yoga that come with like tradition and a belief system attached, how they might still honor the belief system, but maybe treat within or teach the broader subject within an evidence-based framework. So that's helpful for people just to get ideas for how we still can completely support and honor the whole complete yoga practice, but also from an evidence-based perspective. And it's helpful so people, sorry.
Sorry, Jenny, carry on.
Okay. And it's also helpful because people realize that they can study and learn with you and your program and you are a lead teacher in your teacher training programs, but you also have other really wonderful and well-trained teachers who teach with you. And like the yin yoga training is taught by Tarin, I think you said her name is. So people should just know that they can find you and follow you. And we'll put links to all of your resources in the show notes. But would you say, Catherine, if you want to throw out like one or two places that would be the best if someone right now wants to go follow you, like where can they find you?
Probably Instagram, at Wellness, or it's not, at Wellness Connection Yoga. That's the easiest to do. And then the link for the trainings are in the bio at the top of it. And and the website is just teacher training. We don't do anything else at all. We just do teach. We specialize. It's kind of like I like it like a mini yoga university sort of thing. So so that's probably the best way to describe us, I think.
That is perfect. And that's really simple. Then people know where to go. Well, with all of that, Catherine, I feel like you answered our questions so thoroughly and wonderfully and really presented such a great framework and way that we might approach this wonderful practice of yoga that we have on our hands. Travis, did you have any last questions? Or do you think?
I think, I mean, I have so many more questions that I think that we'll have to get Catherine on again.
Yes.
But I just want to reiterate like how awesome it was to hear your perspective on this. And I think there were just so many knowledge bombs in there, and I appreciate your unfiltered you know, you're not, like you said, you're not afraid to tell it like it is, and I think that's really important when we're having this conversation. So thank you.
Thank you both for having me. And as you know, I wish I lived down the road because I've just got so many questions of my own on so many different topics. But thank you so much for having me on. I really enjoyed talking to both of you.
Yay. Thank you, Catherine. We appreciate you.